We will now turn our attention to a discussion on strategies to boost energy efficiency and to minimize the carbon footprint of a company. Our speakers include Tim Brhel, Business Development Specialist for RealmFive in Lincoln, Nebraska. Tim was raised on a farm near Denton, Nebraska, and graduated from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln in 2003 with major degrees in ag economics and agribusiness and a minor in agronomy. Over 16 years, he has worked as a farm advisor in ag retail, then as a business advisor for farm operations in 13 states. In 2020, he joined RealmFive to help businesses understand the return on investment and efficiency improvements that can occur by leveraging remote technology. Our second speaker is Craig Schultz, the Chief Operating Officer for Frontier Cooperative in Lincoln, Nebraska. He's a graduate of the University of Nebraska-Kearney with degrees in agribusiness, business administration, and a minor in economics. He has 29 years of agribusiness experience and helped lead Midwest Farmers Cooperative and Frontier Cooperative through their 2019 merger. Today, he oversees 62 locations and 425 employees. Tim, Craig, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, Jess. Yeah, I just want to take time to just thank Jess and everybody here for having us speak. I think this is a great opportunity. It's not like we're the main experts in this area. I think we're all in a great place of learning. And so this just gives us an opportunity to meet and network and kind of share what we know with what we've done together. I think from our side of things, looking at how we approach looking at sites, we look things at more of a systems approach and creating smart sites. So we're trying to understand specifically how do the sites work in the best way possible. But all that aside, just how this really started was really just a conversation. You know, geographically, we're two companies that have headquarters about a stone's throw away, and you know, the systems approach is important, but also that relationship is even much more important. Understanding who we are that we're working with and really kicking it off with a brainstorming session of, hey, you know, what are the problems that you're seeing? We know we have a lot of guys that are good at technology on our team. You've got a lot of processes and a lot of things that you're wanting to get done. And so how do we understand where each other are coming from and what we need to accomplish? And I think having that brainstorming session was very helpful in just understanding what are those major pain points that we need to address. And I remember specifically after that meeting, you came up to us and you're like, hey, you know, there's some things that we can work on. There was a lot of things we uncovered, but you can't have budget for everything, right? So it's understanding what are the main things that we can do. And it wasn't like we came up with a solution right off the bat. It was kicking off a succession of meetings that help build understanding in how those processes are. And so all that then leads to us ultimately delivering what we did. But maybe you can share a little bit about that.
Right. Yeah, I think, you know, we met in 2019. It was, you know, we were a newly merged company. We were working on synergies. We were trying to figure out some efficiencies for our company and how that was all going to play out. And so RealmFive being just down the street from us was a good opportunity for us to sit down and really talk about those pain points. And, you know, we covered everything from inventory to personnel, which, you know, a lot of this is going to center on personnel, and it's a lot of what we're going to hear over the next couple of days. But and how we are going to manage our business going forward with a personnel market that was getting more limited every day, right? And so how could we do things that was going to help us improve that? And so talking about those things, you know, one of the, like Tim said, one of my main pain points at the time was, you know, grain bin temps and how we manage that. And this is just one of the many things we've worked on. But at the time, as a co-op, right, we don't have the luxury of having extra people like I'm sure all of you guys have, everybody you need. But you know, but when it becomes agronomy time, when it's energy time, when it's time to haul feed, whatever that is, we're using those same people to do all those jobs, right? And so it seemed like at a lot of our sites that when agronomy season rolled around in March and all of a sudden those people needed to go run sprayers, they need to run tender trucks or plants, we kind of forgot about grain. We forgot about the other things that we were supposed to be doing, and then all of a sudden we'd run into some quality issues, maybe some surprises here or there. And it wasn't anything overwhelming, but it was something that I wanted to try and put a stop to early so we didn't have a bigger problem. And so that was one of the things we talked about was how can we automate that whole process of looking at our grain temps. Instead of actually having to walk out to a bin, plug in the monitor and go through every dial and look at every sensor, how could we put that on a computer screen that would make that easier for our people, that they could look at their temps instantaneous. It was at the click of a mouse, and they could figure out what situation they had right away, and then go on about their job. And really, Tim and I had this conversation, and I keep saying I want to take the human element out of it. It's not that our people weren't capable. It's just that they had other things to do, and they got torn in different directions to get things done. And so one of the things we talked about was, can we come up with something like that would reduce that task from hours to minutes, and give them at least the confidence that things were where they needed to be. And so that was one of the things we talked about. I think labor was a big one, and again, not having what we needed to be able to get everything done, that played a lot into that conversation, right? We talked a little bit about site cost, energy cost, rising costs of energy. We talked a lot about, and we'll get into that more here, but we talked a lot about demand charges and electric bills and just how we could alleviate some of that, and grain quality, and we kind of worked our way through a lot of that, right? We talked about inventory, and we're still working on some of those things. We've got the smart sites, as Tim kind of alluded to, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, but having bin sensors or tank sensors on some of our liquid fertilizer tanks, having some sensors on some of our anhydrous ammonia plants to where our dispatcher, when he's dispatching loads, instead of having to wait for a location manager to call him and say, hey, I'm at 20% or whatever it is, he could now just go on the computer and look at what those levels are. Yeah. And so it saved some steps. It saved, maybe created some more efficiencies there where we were getting loads a little more timely where they needed to be and some things like that. So.
Yeah, and I think it's a lot of what Jeff was alluding to too, is this, we coin it as this hyper automation. There's the things on the site that you can automate and get rid of a lot of those menial tasks that labor could otherwise be doing, much more important things.
Right. I think some of we tried to set a few goals, right? And I think one of them was we wanted to maintain consistent grain quality, right? We wanted to talk about reducing power consumption in any form we could, and then lastly, just again about creating efficiencies as we worked our way through that process. And so that kind of got us into the next steps, and we had talked about the bin aeration automation. And there's companies out there, right? We've got a couple companies we work with today, prior to working with RealmFive, that we already had some of these systems in place. But we were trying to make it more of a grand gesture and getting it across our whole locations, now going from, at the time, 27, 28 locations to now 60 at the time, and how we could manage that and try and get those spread out over the whole regions. And so that's kind of how this conversation all got going. So.
Yeah, so that kind of leads to, what did we do? We don't have all the great slides. They just got our face up there. We don't have good slides, but we did deploy devices on 34 different sites, automating grain bins and getting, like you said, the level automation monitoring on those anhydrous and liquid. A lot of that is it's really a turnkey process the way we've done it, but it takes just getting on the sites. Every site is different, and when you look at grain specifically, it's a history lesson. You go onto a site, and how many decades of technology has there been deployed over time? And so you have to go in and look at those sites specifically and get to understand how do we plug in and how do we get to a place where we're getting where we need to go. This provided, centralized visibility for Frontier, getting to be able to see what's going on at those sites from a corporate level, from even a regional level or a management level on the site specifically.
Yeah, I think, what we were able to achieve out of doing what we did was, we started seeing some consistency in our grain conditioning, right? And again, it wasn't a big problem we had. It was just trying to head off an issue that I could see coming, right? And the few little problems we did have. But the other thing was we talked about energy efficiencies and fan usage, right? It was pretty customary when I started 13 years ago with Midwest Farmers Co-op and sat down with the CEO and just kind of went through his pain points. The same thing we did with Tim and RealmFive, but you know, his biggest complaint at the time was our energy bills are just getting out of hand, right? And so that, and we just were over drying corn. We're just things are just not going well. And so one of the things was, you know, first day of harvest, we kicked every leg, drag, conveyor, dust system, lights, radio, whatever else, fans on, and we let everything run until January 1st, it seemed like, and so it was understanding what was going on and how we were doing that. So it was important that we controlled that fan usage, and over those years we had worked through standing operating procedures, we had studied the sites, we had done things, and we'll get into that a little bit more, but that was helping us understand that and doing that. And so one of the things that was key was having that fan usage to where, you know, we weren't running fans during the day, that we were seeing that fans were running during the night where we were in the off-peak times, we were on the off-peak rates, and we weren't pumping 90-degree heat through a 90-degree load of corn that just came in. And so it's just helping guys understand that, working through that process really, right? I think a lot of it as well as part of this process, like Tim said, we got rid of the menial task, and it doesn't mean that they're not important, it's just that we are trying to take as much off of our employees' plates and make their lives hopefully a little bit easier in that whole process, right? So being able to look at that on the computer, as we stated, was important, trying to make that easier for them. You know, it also brought on a little accountability, right, for our location managers. And not that they weren't doing their jobs, but now all of a sudden, instead of them being able to go out and walk in and plug in and them just knowing what their grain temps, now I knew, now my regional operations manager knew, now our VP of grain knew what those temps were. And so now all of a sudden it's a little different story, right? Now it's holding those guys a little more accountable because they know what I know, right? Or I know what they know, basically. And so now they're paying a little more attention to it, which is what we wanted in the long term. You know, I think the other thing that happened out of this was that we had location managers all of a sudden start asking questions on grain quality and how to do it. And even though we had tried to do that years prior, it just never really sunk in because, again, all they did was click the fans off and they clicked them on and off, and that's, you know, when they thought it was the right conditions, and that's what they did. And so it offered them the opportunity to start asking questions and look at their temps every day. And it almost became a thing where, you know, if somebody's temps varied, you know, 1 to 5 degrees, whatever it was. I mean, I have a couple guys that come to mind at a couple locations, and they just lost their mind. Like, oh my God, I got grain going out of condition, I got to move it today. Well, no, you don't, right? And so we had to kind of walk through that process and what that meant, what happened with, you know, the sun or what was going on. And those systems are ran basically based off of the temperature inside and outside the bin. They're ran based off the humidity inside and outside the bin. They're also ran based off the moisture you're hoping to achieve out of that system. And so helping them understand that and having them get a little more involved with that process has been refreshing. And there's a long ways to go, but it's been refreshing at least going through that process and talking about that. So, and again, we gave them a tool to be able to do their jobs better, to be able to give them time to do more things, so they don't feel like they're spread so thin, and give them some time to maybe do some other things that maybe they were wanting to do in that process. So, and I think lastly, it really helps us set up for the future, and really from the standpoint of, you know, with retirements, with turnover, that when we're bringing new people in those positions and being able to train them, maybe hopefully a little bit quicker through that process, because maybe there's some things such as this that, you know, with the automated system, it helps them maybe concentrate on a few other things and then come back to this, because it's not such a thing glaring them in the face that they have to learn right now. And so then it gives us time to really educate them how we want to, and work through that whole process. And all through this process, I mean, a lot of good things, right? But challenges, right? Challenges with personnel, because this is the way I've always done it. I've always done it this way, and it's worked just fine. Well, in some cases, yeah, maybe you're right. In some cases, maybe you just got lucky, right? And having to explain that. And that's probably been our biggest challenge, is working through that, and getting them to understand the why, and helping them understand that why, and working through that whole process. So.
Yeah, I was going to add to that. I think some of the beauty of these conversations has been just that educational piece, guys asking, I mean, in times where they wouldn't have asked before. And so that's even in that process, they're learning more and becoming better at what they do. And so that's been the fun side thing that I've seen just over this whole course of time. But I think a lot of the difference makers has been being able to sit down and talk about pain points and talk about challenges and ask all the questions of what location managers, how they manage grain, all that, not just selling a thing, because it all comes back to what are we ultimately trying to accomplish together. And I think that was an important direction to go with it. Also, you've brought up the whole long-term thinking versus short-term gain. You know, there are things that we can do in the short term that might fix our problem now, but does that ultimately lead to something where we're going to want to be in 5 years? You know, Jeff talked a lot about this morning of, you know, the vision of grain over 10 years. What does that look like? And every operation is going to be different, and who they have working for them and what the capabilities are. But I think those are important questions to ask.
Yeah, I think, you know, I always get asked, you know, what keeps you up at night? Well, it's personnel, right? I mean, it's what are we going to do in 5 years, and how are we going to service the customer today with everything they want, right? And you're all going through this today, right? And so we've talked about automation. You heard about it this morning. But, you know, automating facilities, trying to take some of those tasks and create those situations where it's just easier for the customer. It's no different when we order sprayer, right? We're trying to order the best option for the customer or for the employee to take that pressure off them, reduce their stress, and put them in situations that they can thrive instead of just always feel like they're running behind. And so we're nowhere near done, right? This is just a start. I'm sure people have figured out other ways to do it. This is just where we decided to take this road and really start here, and really it's helped us in working with when we're building a new project, when we're doing capital investments and looking at different things from that standpoint, how it affects the employee, how it affects the customer, and things like that. And so these tools have just helped us kind of along the way as we're doing what we're doing today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that leads me to these steps. I was just thinking about this topic, and what are the steps that we really took that you guys can take away? And so I don't have a slide on this, and it's not a good acronym like Andrea had, sticky. That was a pretty good one, HOP. But I would say SUFAS. So if you can write this down, it's SUFAS. So know your sites, know your utility, envision the future, leverage your assets, and challenge your SOPs. And we can talk about a little bit more of those as we go through, but I think those were the critical points from a high level that were important to know. How do we apply what we know and what we're learning to this organization?
Yeah, I think, you know, starting with the first one, know your sites, you know, this started for me probably 13 years ago when I joined Midwest Farmers Co-op, and like I discussed earlier, working with the CEO about pain points, but it was really just understanding the sites, right? Going to those 5 or 6, 7 sites that we were really just seeing some high energy bills and trying to figure out what was going on. And really it was just taking a history lesson, as Tim mentioned before, and figuring out how we did things, how legs ran as far as how many amps we were pulling on every leg, drag, conveyor, how we managed grain from a standpoint of aeration, how we moved grain at harvest. You know, a lot of our locations back then, more so today probably, were deficit space, right? And so we were moving grain in and out constantly during harvest to keep the doors open, to keep taking grain from the customers, right? So understanding that a little bit as well, and what that process was. And just talking to the employees to kind of get a better idea of what we were doing, right? I think that was a lot of it. And again, every site wasn't the same. Every site was different. So sitting down and understanding that was a big feat, and just having those conversations so we could understand what our sites were actually doing, and if there was changes we could potentially make to make things easier or reduce some cost from an energy perspective, and working with that. I think the other thing to consider was the value of commodities, right? I mean, corn and beans, and what we were what we were doing as far as movement of grain and some things like that. Looking at the current energy usage, right? I mean, Elmwood, one of our locations, was just, demand charges were just horrible, just out of touch really, and so we had to again understand what was going on there and why we were having that. And then the last was just, what kind of labor did we have? Were we short labor? Were we running? We were just letting things run because we didn't have people at this pit or that pit or whatever, and trying to understand what that looked like as well. And that kind of rolls right into know your utility. One of the first things we did with this process, we sat down with one of our main suppliers of energy, which at that time was Omaha Public Power District. And we sat down with our rep to better understand demand charges and talk about kilowatts and talk about off-peak and peak hours and winter rates and summer rates, and trying to figure that out to hopefully just somewhere see if there's something we could do to improve at that point. And so that was important, just to go through that process and understand a little bit better about what we were working with, which helped us again then start writing SOPs and understanding that a little bit better, right? And today we do that. Today, yeah, we sit down with them once a year and we go through all those sites and we say, okay, we look at the historical data over the last 3 to 5 years and say, okay, this is what we've seen. This is a typical harvest compared to this year, whatever it was. And then we can adjust those rates as needed once a year. And in that process, right, I'm going back to understanding demand charges, right, and knowing that our rates are usually set during the busiest time of year for the whole 12 months after that. And so going through that process, understanding that, and then figuring out a way to try to alleviate some of that was really a big thing for us, right? So I think sitting down today and looking at those bills instead of seeing them a year later or whatever that is has helped us with some of that. And as we build projects, again, the capital investment, being able to say, you know what, this is a site that is just not great for us. Maybe we need to look at something different from a cost perspective and things like that. So I think also in working with the utilities, right, most utilities today, whether it's OPPD or some of the other ones, are requiring soft starts or VFDs with anything over 10 horsepower, right? And so I think it's understanding that process, understanding the applications that those potentially fit in, and then finding a company to work with that understands those things as well, right? And so we've been doing that for quite a while as we work through that process, is making sure we have the correct piece in place when it comes to those applications and working with them on that standpoint. So.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think knowing the sites helps then lead into knowing the utility, because obviously if you have really expensive utilities at a site, you need to understand how to play the game. And in talking with MPPD and other PPDs out there in Nebraska, and it's probably different in other states, other Excel Energy in Minnesota, and there's a bunch of others. It's like walking in a game room. Every utility is a different game. Every game has different rules. And so if you can go in and understand the rules of the game, you might have a bunch of locations in a bunch of different games. It's understanding how do you come alongside that, because they also don't want to charge you so much either for energy. I mean, they're trying to maximize what they can send you and what you need, and you're not trying to hit the peak out of the park. I mean, you want to level that out, and there's specific things that you can do even during like a busy harvest season to level those out. So I think that leads us into this whole envision the future piece, because once you know the pieces of your own game, knowing your sites, knowing your utilities, then you can dream a little bit, which is, I think, the fun part, is sitting down and saying, okay, what do we want to accomplish? Instead of being caught up in your business, you're working on your business, and you're saying, here's how we want this to go, looking forward. And, obviously we have our take, and then understanding how, you've walked through that.
Right. Yeah, I think, and this is nothing new to the industry, but, we've gone to the point of where we've developed these hub facilities, and they're all throughout the Midwest, and basically a one-stop shop, right, for our customers. So, building a big facility where you've got a grain facility, you've got dry fertilizer facility, you've got liquid and fertilizer, liquid fertilizer and chemical facilities all in one place, right? Seed, everything at that one stop. And so we've really pushed hard in trying to develop more and more of those as we go along. Because again, the smaller sites are a little more inefficient, requires more people because we're not automated, and we're probably not going to spend the money on automation for a site that only dumps 100,000 bushels a year or whatever that is, just because it's not cost effective or cost efficient. And so as we develop hub facilities and we are building these facilities to take care of our customers, right, we're seeing a place where, one, we can concentrate all of our resources, we can concentrate all of our personnel. Just because they may staff on a regular day, if nothing's going on, there may only be 5 or 6 people there at this whole location. During the busy times, we may have 15, 20, 30 people working out of that one location, whether they're driving tender trucks or whether they're loading dry fertilizer or loading trains or loading trucks or unloading trucks or whatever that may be. And so, again, it's a location where we can try and create some efficiencies, where we created quite a bit of efficiencies by having a facility like that, and really create an experience for our customers, which has been a big focus for us, really is that customer experience, right? And what can we do to improve that for them, and utilizing those tools to be able to do that. And so I think Frontier as a whole, right, we've looked at that customer experience, not only with facilities, but with technology, with a mobile app that they can sell grain, they can look at their last ticket they dumped at the elevator, they can put orders in for fertilizer, they can put orders in for selling grain, they can sign contracts, they can do different things with that app that really gives them the tools, because these are things they're asking for. So, right, so it's not just that, it's technology of the facility, it's technology in their hands, but it's about creating that experience for them that we really concentrate on and give them ability to use. So.
Yeah, that kind of takes us to leveraging your assets, and I think, doing a lot of these site surveys, it's especially when you go through mergers and acquisitions and you take on new sites, there's just the complication of bridging two companies, but then there's also the maybe there's knowledge loss, what's there. So understanding your sites is so important. But then once you do, you can leverage what you've got there. You've got a lot of bins. I've been on sites, and it's not just Frontier sites. I've been on hundreds of sites, but it's, we don't have cables in that bin. We've never used it. Well, they've probably not been there that long at that location, and then you go in the bin, and you're like, oh, there's cables there. They haven't been used for a decade, and then you go and test them. Yeah, they actually test pretty good. So there's assets here that we can leverage. Sometimes they're not great. Sometimes the payloader ripped them off the flat. But in either case, we don't have to just reinvest all of our budget bullets. If you have so many bullets in a gun in your budget, it's not in new everything every 2 years. It's what can we leverage on our site to get us the most impact for our dollar. And I think that's been pretty interesting to see that there's a lot of opportunity. I think there's a lot of opportunity in a lot of the sites that I've run across that we can leverage what we've got.
Yeah, and I think, really even leveraging the utility companies to a point, and it's not like we're going to strong arm them, or like we're going to get a 50% reduction, but it's, we've been able to work with them on grants, right? We've done these bin systems at quite a few sites, and we've been able to work with them on some grants that they offer to help pay for some of that, right? There's grants available if you put all LED lighting in your offices, or if you put in a 95% efficient HVAC system, or whatever that is. And so there's opportunities there to work with them, because again, at the end of the day, they're there to still provide electricity and have a business, but they're also trying to lessen the load during the peak times where they're trying to operate as well and not get in a critical situation where it causes them problems. And so, and I think for too long, we just accepted it was what it was, right? An energy bill was an energy bill, and you just paid it and you moved on. But I do feel like they do want to be a partner. They do want to work with us. They do want to provide those opportunities and those resources available to really help us succeed as well. So.
Yeah, and you've talked about the architecture of, you know your sites, you know what utilities you have, you're envisioning the future, and now you can say, okay, based off of legs and drags and where do we put VFDs and where do we put soft starts, that makes a big impact too on, what you can access from the utility and then leverage based off of who you have working on the site.
Right. Yeah, I think that's, as we went through that whole process, just, it was enlightening to work with them and know that they just weren't there to, again, charge you every month and collect your bill and collect their check and whatever it was. So it's been an interesting process to sit down with them and just work through that whole process and have them be involved. And then, again, meet with them at least once a year, if not more, to go over that and really see where you're at and see what really best fits you and fits them and work through that whole process. So a lot of this, as we work through this whole process, and we talked about the SOPs earlier, our standard operating procedures, after we were able to spend some time and work with our facilities and really figure out what that looked like and what they were all doing and try and make that some sort of a continuous flow or similar flow, I guess. And so really for us to sit down with those locations and work with that and try and get everybody to do the same thing and using technology to do that, right, and work through that whole process. We were reducing energy consumption by having those fans basically run at night. And really today, when that system's running, we don't see those fans run during the day really a lot. I mean, most of them are running at night from that midnight to about 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning situation. So again, it's running because it's not seeing the humidity. It's not seeing any temperatures. It's seeing those temperatures drop, so it's sensing that that's the time for those fans to run. So again, those fans are running in the off-peak time, so we're not getting hit with the big rates. We're not seeing a lot of usage either because those fans are running in those 3 to 4 or 5 hours, and that's really it. Once that grain's cooled down, that's what we're seeing, and we're able to reduce some exposure, some liability there at that point with that system and the way it's being ran today. And so I think that's been key for a lot of our locations and giving them the ability to do more. And again, we talked about the menial task, and I don't want to make it sound like it's just mundane things, but it's things that they have to do every day, and we're trying to make that easier for them, right, in that whole process. So I think that's been important. And I think safety, right, we talked about safety, we heard about it earlier from before, and I think really anything we can do to reduce some stress, anything we can do to reduce the amount of tasks they have to do, not putting them in a situation where they're always hurried, where they're getting them in situations they shouldn't be in, right? Anything we can do from that standpoint to help from a safety perspective is always a top priority in working through that whole process. So I think, we've talked about transparency. We've heard it a couple times this morning, but I think, it's allowing our location managers to be a lot more accountable than what they were previously, and want to be invested in their locations and want to be involved in those discussions. Not that we're going to call them and say, hey, we're going to sell, 50,000 bushels. Are you okay with that? It's probably not that kind of a conversation, but it's them having the confidence that their grain is in good condition. They can ship it when they need to, and it's not usually an issue. So it's having them involved in that process has been, again, enlightening, because at least now you're seeing them want to be better, that they're striving to be better, that they want to. It's a pride thing, right? They don't want to have crappy grain. They want to make sure it's good, right? They want to make sure there's no issues, and so that's kind of how it's worked out for us. So, and I think lastly, it's just increasing that communication. It's opened up that communication between maybe our vice president of grain and the locations. It's opened it up between maybe the regional managers and the location managers, between the employees and the location manager. It's just opened that all up, because now they're all asking questions because they all want to be involved with it, because it's technology. They all want to be involved with that, right? They want to see how it works, and they want to offer ideas, so it brings more input, I guess, from that standpoint. So,
yeah, and a lot of that's just about challenging your current SOPs, because we've done this for decades because the guy before us taught us, but is that really the way we need to do it based off what we have with new technology now, based off the fact that we can now digitize the data at different locations, so that you can then look back and analyze, okay, this is why something happened. It's not to browbeat anybody. It's more of, it's understanding, it's education. There's a lot of contextual things that impact what ultimately happens, and sometimes it's not within your control, but you need the data to help understand the situation and provide insight.
Yeah, and I think going forward, right, it's going to be a continued process, right? Because I think as we get again, as we go through retirements, as we go through turnover, the days of the farm kids are long gone, it seems like, in our industry, because we don't have the dads pushing the kids off the farm to come to work for the local co-op, because farming's better today. There's better practices, there's technology involved, right? And so now it's finding employees that are willing to put in the hours. They're finding employees that are willing to understand what we're doing every day. So I think the more technology we have with that, the more they're going to be apt to want to be involved with that. And so it's just a continued process. Like I said earlier, it's a start. We're nowhere near done, and I feel like if we ever feel like we are done, then we've probably failed somewhere along the way. And so I think it's just going to be a continued learning process through this whole thing for us. So.
Yeah, I think a lot of it, for me, looking overall, it's increasing the speed of communication. You know, you have that saying, you can't manage what you can't measure, and I'd almost say you can't manage what you can measure, but not timely. Like, it doesn't matter, even if you have the data, you write it down, nobody ever gets to it in a timely fashion, you can't do anything with it. So how can we digitize that and get it somewhere faster where we can make decisions that are important, or automate the decisions that just should be automated? So.
Thanks, that was great information. And I have a couple questions here, just some follow-up on, some of the points that you raised. And I think one of them is just ballpark, what has been the savings, right? Some of these facilities, just in general, don't need, I know we're being recorded here, so we don't need exact numbers from you, but it would just be, from in general, working with the utility companies, and obviously every facility is different, right? You could have a more modern facility, an older facility, what has it been after you've made some of the changes? Just an example.
So Tim and I talked about this a lot over the last few weeks, is because there wasn't, and it's probably not right to say, but it's probably not something we really completely realized it, right? Because in the process of this whole thing, we're also building, right? We're adding bins, we're adding legs, we're adding equipment. So potential savings that maybe we were seeing from fan usage was probably offset because now I've got another 100 horsepower leg or 200 horsepower leg or whatever it is. And so I think from a savings perspective, it was more just getting those standard operating procedures set, getting our employees to all work towards the same goal, right? To understand what we were doing. That was probably the biggest benefit from all of it. And there was challenges, because it was, again, I've always done it this way, that's just the way it's gonna be, but, so it wasn't without its challenges and some stubbornness, but going through that process and helping them understand, having those discussions to understand what demand charges were, what this was doing by turning everything on, right, was a good added benefit for them to understand that. And so from a savings perspective, I could sit here and tell you we've saved 30%, but it's probably not that, right? So.
Yeah, a lot of what we're looking at too, we're leveraging some third-party studies about energy savings and the fact of just automating grain fan automation in a bin can save up to 75%. So a lot of it's just knowing the facility, knowing the context around that. If it's a wet year, if it's a dry year, how is it managed in between? What were the weather conditions around like that around the time where the grain was in the bin? That all has to do with it. Are you even playing the utility game the way the rules are stated, or are you just kind of ignoring them and you're paying the bills? That matters a lot.
Well, and I think it also who the utility company is, right? Because they have their energy sources and how they have to distribute it.
Yeah.
Right. There's a lot of factors that can be involved in that. Or what are they dealing with? There could be weather-related issues that could have an impact on the utility provider, and increased costs for them, and how that's all carried over. There's a lot of factors too, as far as how those costs are calculated. That's what I was kind of curious about that as well. Your discussions with them, if they kind of explain that process to you as far as their rates.
That's just an important aspect of leveraging your utility, getting in a room and having a conversation with them, because they're on your team. You know, we want to work together, and it's so helpful to have those conversations because you just ultimately get to a better place. And nobody's an island. We need each other to help get each other better.
And I think 10, 12 years ago, right, the conversation was a lot different than it is today because it wasn't, I think when we sat down with them the first time 12, 13 years ago, I think at least that had never been done. We had never done that, right? So I think they're a little surprised, and I'm sure they've done it with others, but from a co-op perspective, they just never had that conversation, right? And so I think that's our relationship. And then again, as we've gone through and we've had some different reps, it's just been a constant communication with them to help understand what they're doing, how they're trying to alleviate stress on their lines, right? And what we can do from that perspective to help them. And again, that's why you've seen the things, the requirements as far as the soft starts and anything over 10 horsepower. I mean, they're trying to do what they can because they know during the summer months that they're going to get hit hard, right? They know that they're going to have air conditioning and they're going to have everything. Kids are home during the summer, so every TV, every light, everything's on, right? So they're trying to alleviate the stress on their system as well. And so yeah, it's been just part of that process.
Well, and there's a lot of Teslas out here too, right? I'm sure there's a lot of energy sources that they have to deal with out in this area,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
No, well, and I think that was another question too, is like, have you noticed anything from certain items? I mean, between dryers, conveyors, I mean, is there anything that you've noticed with some of the changes that you've made where there's been probably the most savings? Or is that still, once again, like you were describing, is that still kind of in process as you're going through the transition?
I think for us, it's still the transition, right? Because we're continuing to build, we're continuing to add to facilities. So again, I think when you're going to a hub facility, right, you're going to have, our bill's going to grow exponentially, right? We've got a lot going on there. So I think trying to manage it the best we can through those procedures is what we continue to strive to do. But I think that's, I think for us right now, we're still in the building phase, so which is good, right? But it's still trying to understand and put in place as we do things to be able to put those safeguards in place that we are protecting ourselves a little bit from those big peaks and valleys with energy cost and bills.
I think that's where the holistic approach in these hub locations, like hub location isn't just grain.
Right.
It's fertilizer, it's other things that you're possibly doing. And so being able to orchestrate the hyper automation that you have going on the site is important. And that's where you can understand that, hey, some product is moving or running around the same time you're moving product. So can we shut electric down on these processes, lengthen out the time that we're doing them during off-peak hours, and get to the same endpoint? Like, do we have to do it all in one day, or can we stretch it out and save more money over time?
Well, I think with a hub facility, right, you're taking a facility that's got all these different facets of the business, and in that process, we've probably closed down 5 or 6 smaller locations and concentrated everything at that one, right? So now 5 or 6 bills from this other location, now it's in this one. Hopefully we'll reduce some cost by combining everything into one thing, combining all operations, but you're still going to have those challenges, right?
Well, and one of the questions that I should have asked Jeff, I don't know if Jeff's still here, probably not, but when he was talking about the number of employees that he has, and we're talking about the next 10 years, where do you see the number of employees? I mean, he was talking that 425 employees, but where you think about this automation and everything that's going on, this efficiency, same thing with you and the number of employees that you have. I mean, that could be cut in half, right? I mean, it's like, where do you see the number of employees you have in 10 years, and how does that deal, impact efficiency?
Yeah, that's something that keeps me up at night because, again, we have to figure that out. And will we have 425 employees in 10 years, 15 years, 20 years? I don't see that happening, right? I think we're all sitting with that struggle today. Our business will have to change. Automation has to happen because we've got to be able to do the same or more with less, right? And it doesn't mean we're going to have less people. We're just going to have to move people around a little bit more to be able to get done what we need to, right? I mean, we've got a facility at Syracuse that, technically I can run the grain facility with 3 people. And really I could probably do with 2. other than loading trains, which maybe takes 5, but I can do it with 2 or 3 people. Now, I take that to another location that's a little more manual, that hasn't been automated yet, that's probably 5 or 6 or 7, right? And so I think the more we can automate, the more we can get to that point. And we're on that, but we probably should have started a long time ago, right? We should have probably started a lot sooner than we are today, but I think at the time, because this hasn't been something that just happened, right, like this, right? But I think it probably snuck up on us a little faster than what we anticipated, right? So I think the personnel's, it's always going to be an issue. If somebody solved it, God, I'd love to talk to you and figure it out and get your perspective on it. But I think we're all dealing with the same thing, and I think that pool, the pool of people is shrinking because there is more, right? There's more industry coming in, there's more things happening, and so we're competing against that. And the closer you are to a bigger city, a little more challenging it becomes, right? Because we're competing against the warehouses, the truck drivers, the Amazons, things like that. And so maybe when you're a little farther on the rural area, but even that, right? We struggle in those areas today in the rural areas because you think about 20 years ago and families had 4 and 5 kids, right? And today it's 1 or 2 kids. And so that pool is shrinking, right? And when you get out to the rural areas, there's nobody there because they've either moved out of the small community or they're involved with the family farm. But there may not be anything else from an industry standpoint there, right? And so that's where we struggle is those areas and we're having to pay probably a little bit more of a wage to get people to go to those areas because of that reason, right? And so I think that's going to be, the farther you get out from the bigger cities, I mean, we're seeing it today, and that's going to continue to be a struggle. Because I just don't think the pool's there anymore, so.
And that's what I was also going to ask you, obviously coming from a co-op, so how has this played out, with your owners? I mean, obviously with the co-op, how this entire approach and everything that you've been, would have been their thoughts when, is it something that they came up with or something you presented to them? How did that process work?
I think we've worked with our board of directors pretty closely when it comes to all this and really explained the situation. We've kept them in the loop all along and had these conversations. So whether it's a regular meeting, whether it's going through a board retreat or whatever that is, this is really a large part of what we talk about, right? When you talk about your owners and of course you go and spend a large amount of cash, well, you're spending my money. Well, yeah, we are, but we have to in order to survive. We have to in order to be able to take care of you as a customer long into the future. And so they understand it. They just don't like to see it sometimes, right, from a perspective of spending money. But it's a constant conversation. I mean, it's at every monthly meeting. It's something, whether it's personnel or whether it's a location or what's going on. And as long as we can continue to invest in our facilities and invest in our personnel and keep them involved with that makes things a lot easier. So.
Well, I have one more question. I can open it up to. Oh, do you have a question? Yeah, sir.
Ask your question first. Go ahead.
No, we'll tag team. You ask yours first, then I'll ask mine.
So you talked a lot about like utilities within kind of the operation. Within this project, are you looking at doing the same thing with trucking, with diesel? Diesel's not getting any cheaper, so what does it look like to be more efficient on truck volume?
So from a dispatching perspective, when it comes to our trucks, I mean, we're doing, from an automation perspective, we've been doing it for quite a while from whether we're working with our sprayers, right? We're dispatching with 1 to 2 people dispatching sprayers, and instead of having a sprayer at every location or a truck at every location, right? We've been able to reduce through the merger. We started with, I think, 40 or 42 sprayers, and I'll get to the trucking here in a minute, and now we're down to 30. And we've been able to do that because of dispatching, because of mobile apps, because of platforms that we're using, that constant flow of information from the time the advisor puts the order into all the way through completion and billing, right? All of that is paperless. All that just streams back and forth through automation. And so we've been able to reduce, from a cost perspective, buying all these extra sprayers. tender trucks, things like that. I mean, all of our tender drivers have iPads so they can see exactly where it is, turn-by-turn directions. They've got the order there. They know exactly the product going on, so it's a double check for our applicators. So through that process of dispatching and those automated tools has helped us from that perspective. Trucking, transportation fleet, and we run about 40 trucks plus some independents hauling grain to some of our train loaders, to end users, whatever that may be. That's been a little bit slower to get to that point, but we're slowly getting to that point where now direct-to-farm loads, a lot of that's coming through mobile apps and things like that. So we're trying to limit recreational trucking, right? I mean, we all do it today, right? And so we're trying to limit that as much as possible, trying to do as much back hauls as possible. We're trying to route them with technology, reduce phone calls to the dispatcher. We're trying to have it all at their fingertips on an app, right? So a lot of our those processes have been to that point, right? Have we saved a lot of diesel fuel? Well, probably not yet, but we're getting there. I think from a perspective of in the field, the application machines, we've been able to, I don't want to say reduce personnel, we've just been able to move personnel other ways, but by automating our loadout facility, by automating that process out in the field, by automating the application process, all the way through billing, it's really streamlined and we've reduced that time it takes to get a lot of that done, right? It's not near perfect yet, but we're getting there. And I feel a lot more confident today than I do, 5 years ago, and we've been doing this for a while, so.
Yeah, I would say on the NH3 side too, being able to, initially it was, we need to know inventory at our sites. And then that has led to, well, it's less about the inventory, it's how many trucks do we need to send over there? And does this guy saying I need it versus this guy saying I need it versus this guy saying I need it, what do I trust? And so a lot of times you can let the data speak for that. And so much so that you can have a logistics guy go on vacation and feel like he can go on vacation because he can just easily give somebody else, have them get access and then see that and make sure trucks go where they need to go. So I think there's a lot of saved trips by just not chasing your tail or having the grain go bad because it's not being washed because we're focused on agronomy and now we got to move grain. So I think there's a lot of those aspects that come up too.
Okay, I'll go to John and then Jim.
Yeah. Good morning, gentlemen. John Coppert with Jeeps. Fantastic presentation. Really enjoyed it. Can you touch a little bit, though, on actual carbon intensity scoring? Because whether we love it, whether we loathe it, with things like sustainable aviation fuel, from the time that the seed goes in the ground by the farmer until the molecule of the fuel is produced, we will have to capture the carbon intensity score. Can you talk about that just a bit?
Oh, go ahead.
You? No, yeah, carbon's a big buzzword. I don't want to offend. There's probably strong opinions either way about it, but I think at the end of the day, you are right. That's where things are headed, and we're needing to track that information. So however we do that in our operations, we just need to be capturing that data digitally and then being able to trace it back to what ultimately is going in the bowl or on the plate, things like that. I know in the other projects that we've worked on, like in the sugar beet industry, we're understanding when lifters are pulling beets out of the ground, understanding where the trucks are going on the road, crossing scales, automating that process, going in facilities, tracking where they're going into the piles. So there's elements of that I think are pieces that go into this whole hyper-automation process that once you capture the data, you can, with more confidence, give an idea of how much energy it took to get there.
I think, and I don't spend a lot of time in this part of it, but just based on conversations we have and meetings, I think when they decide what that needs to look like, then maybe we can better understand it. I think that's where we struggle today, is that it's still at a high level, that getting it down to the farmer and what that looks like and those common practices, I think that's just the struggle today that at least I hear from our board members, I hear from some of our customers that they just don't understand it yet. And I think that's the biggest problem we have today. And I think there's just got to be more education around it. And they have to develop what those parameters are for everybody to really grab hold of it. So.
Jim?
Okay, I have kind of 3 questions here I'll throw at you. I know you talked about managing your aeration fans. Have you done any installation of demand monitors and any other load shedding? Addressed power factor use, numbers at all? And then any supplemental generation, wind, solar?
I was going to ask the solar question. You took my question, Jim.
So none of the above. We've talked about capacitor banks. We've talked about different things from that perspective. Where we struggle with that is getting people, other than the electric company, electricians or whatever, to maybe understand that. Not that they don't, but it's not really their area of expertise, right? And so I think for us, it's been really trying to find that company that can maybe help us with that. And I'm sure they're out there. We just probably haven't spent enough time to really figure that out, what that potentially looks like. As far as solar, anything like that, I think in our areas they're trying to take production out and put in some solar farms, which depending on who you talk to is a good thing or a bad thing, because usually they want to take the best ground and not the crappiest ground out of production, right? And I think that's causes some pain points, but we've got a lot of concrete elevators that we could probably sure put some solar panels on top of, and I'm sure they would want to give us some free electricity for that, but pretty sure that's not how that works. But now we really haven't got into it yet. So.
Excellent presentation. Just to follow up, have you done anything, you all, on the efficiency? Have you done anything to track, though, what your energy supplier, through smart meters and smart billing, what they're billing you to make sure that's what you're really getting?
Probably haven't paid enough attention to it to really figure that out, right? Again, meeting with them once a year, they're probably going to show us what they want us to see, but we really haven't got into the smart meter part of it.
Install any check meters or anything?
No.
We got.
Hi, I'm Larry from SEW Eurodrive. I've been in the gear reducer industry for 43 years. I want to just bring something up to your attention and your colleagues here. Have you ever considered getting away from belts and shivs? Only in North America are we still using gear reducers with belts and shivs. We've done studies on it. It's about an 11% loss of efficiency, give or take, depending upon wear, tension, alignment. We're a direct drive gear manufacturer, so we're the ones in 1931 who put the motor into the gearbox. So it's much more efficient. So 11% gain on your electric immediately. Mm-hmm. So I just wanted to throw that out to you.
Yeah, I think it's probably worth a conversation, right? It's probably nothing we've really had a conversation about before, but I'd be willing to sit down and talk to you about it. So after the meeting here.
Any other questions, comments here for Craig? Is there? Okay. Well, thank you, gentlemen, very much. Very good conversation.